Hello, in this video, we will introduce static variables, constants, and methods. A static variable is shared by all objects of the class. A static method cannot access instance members. Let's look at this class, the so-called class. It has the instance member field radius. Every instance has its own radius. We add a new data field, number of objects. This data field tracks the number of objects created from the so-called class. So when you run the program, if you have not created any so-called objects, number of objects is 0. If you create 1, it becomes 1. If you create 2, it becomes 2. If you create 3, it becomes 3. This number of objects is not dependent on individual object. It is shared by all the objects of the same class. This variable is a static variable. In the UML notation, we have the underline to denote this is a static member. Same as get number of objects, it returns number of objects. This method is a static method. It is shared by all the objects of the same class. You use the keyword static to denote a static member. Here is static int number of objects, a data field. Static int get number of objects. This is a method. Now you can also define a constant. Constant does not change. It's shared by all the objects of the class. This is final static double. Let's look at this so-called class now. We're going to add this static member. This is static member. Every time you create an object, you're going to increase number of objects by 1. This is number of objects is increased by 1. Get number of objects is static. Get area is instance because it depends on the instant variable to compute get area. Every circle has its own radius. Now we're going to write a test program. This is the test program. Before creating any objects, what is the number of objects? Circle dot number of objects. This is 0. Now we create 1. So invoke the constructor. This is the constructor right here. So this radius is 1 and number of objects becomes 2. We're going to create this now. Before we create another object, let's see what is the number of objects. you can use C1 dot number of objects, but it's better to use SOCO. So every object can access this, that's fine, but it's better to use SOCO so you know clearly this number of objects is a static member. S1 was created, now S2. For S2 now, you create S2, you can change the radius of S2. So look, you cannot use SOCO.radius because radius is for each object. It has its own radius. So this is SOCO2 or SOCO1. And C1 dot number of objects, it's now is 2. So it's better to use SOCO dot number of objects. And this is SOCO dot number of objects. Now, let's go back to review this from this figure here. And this is to begin with. This is the definition of the class, the UML diagram. And now, before you create any objects of the SOCO class, this number of objects is 0. And this, after you create SOCO1, number of objects becomes 1. And after you create SOCO2, the number of objects becomes 2. So look, all the objects share one variable, number of objects. There's one memory location for number of objects. And each SOCO has its own radius, so they have independent memory location for radius. And you change this SOCO1's radius to 9, so this is changed to 9. Now let's look at this example here. We have this is incorrect code. I and M1, the method, are instance members. So this is I here, and M1 is instance members. Cannot be accessed from static context. So now you're trying to do this here. This is in main method. Main method is static, so you cannot assign I to J. You cannot invoke M1 from the static context. Well, let's modify this code, and I'm going to create A. This is new A, the object, and now I can use A.I, so this is the instance in A, and A.M1, so this becomes fine. Please read this design guide. This is very important. How do you decide whether a variable or a method should be instance or static? A variable or a method that is dependent on a specific instance of the class should be an instance variable or method. A variable or method that is not dependent on specific instance of class should be static variable. So let's look at this here. This is just run design. So we have the test here, the class, there's a method factorial, this with the parameter n. So this method here does not use any instance members of the class. It should be declared as static. So this is the correct way to do it. Thank you all for watching this video. See you on the next video.